SUNY, so I sneak into places without people noticing very often. Thank you very much for having me tonight, and it's great to look around the room and see so many familiar faces. We've got some of the old war horses here that have been fighting this battle for decades. Bud Schroeder is with us tonight, one of the board member of the NRA. Across New York State, and of course people like Bill Fox and the other people from Genesee County Scope have been doing such a great job. And I want to also thank tonight one of the hardest working people in New York State politics, Steve Allstadt, who's going to be talking to people don't understand the size of New York State. Just the physical, for somebody like Steve Allstadt, going from Jamestown and Buffalo through the southern tier and the Rochester, Syracuse, Albany corridor, up to the North Country, the Adirondacks, the Mohawk Valley, and out to Long Island. It requires extraordinary hours, miles on your car, nights away from home, but he does it for the same reason we are all here tonight, which is that we understand that freedom is not free and that sacrifices must be made. Sometimes it's a lonely position to be in. In the New York State Legislature, my colleague Dave DiPietro, who's also here with us tonight, we were the freshmen, we were the new kids coming in because we had jobs, real jobs in the private sector. And then in our 50s, we're asked by our fellow citizens to run for public office. Me for the first time. Dave had previously served in local government, but I'm sure had never anticipated serving at the state level. But we ran for office. Both had primary opponents because the establishment of our parties didn't support us. And we had to overcome that opposition. And so we entered the New York State Legislature in January 2013. And on the very first day, the very first hour that we were serving, along comes the SAFE Act. My predecessor, Joe Rico, United States Marine, he served over 10 years in the state legislature. He said, geez, Bill, I was there for 10 years and nothing that bad happened. You're there for about an hour. The whole thing starts crumbling down. The story of the SAFE Act, and many of you have heard this story before, Dave and I were told to show up at 2 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, and we did so. And then we were told to go back to our offices because something was brewing, but it wasn't ready yet. We were told to come back at 6 o'clock. We came back at 6 o'clock, and we were told, well, it's still not ready yet. Come back at 10 o'clock at night. Now, this is unprecedented. The state legislature, normally on its opening day, is a ceremonial day. But this time, we knew there was something up, and of course the rumors were flying around that the governor wanted to do a gun bill. And so we came back at 10 o'clock at night, and at 10:15, a staff member came in with a pile of white paper, and it became known as the SAFE Act. It was handed around, and those of us who own firearms, who understand firearms, started reading through it, and we started to realize what we were reading, and our jaws dropped. A flat-out ban on the Chevy truck of firearms, which is the AR design, the most commonly used sporting rifle in America. Restrictions on the purchase of ammunition. Effectively, a registration, keeping track of everybody that purchases ammunition. And on it goes. I read the mental health provisions. My wife is a nurse. She deals with the developmentally disabled. I understand the confidentiality and the privacy concerns that medical professionals have dealing with that population. And yet the governor was making it mandatory for mental health professionals to essentially become snitches on their own patients. And speaking of snitches, we discovered that Mike Green, a former district attorney from Monroe County, now serving in the Cuomo administration, had taken a previously enacted law that was meant to combat drug guns used by drug gangs in urban areas and expanded it to be statewide to turn neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, and to create an East German Stasi-style snitch system where you would get $500 for ratting out your neighbor or your friend, member of your gun club, somebody sitting next to you on Sunday morning in church, if they had a weapon that Andrew Cuomo was now calling an assault firearm. So at 10:15, this piece of legislation arrives on our desks. And we're reading through it, and at 11 o'clock we started to debate it within the Republican caucus, and we were informed the Senate just passed it. Not one of those senators finished reading the bill when they voted on it. Not one of those senators in the dark of night understood what they were voting on. And Republican and Democrat, they threw your rights under the bus because Governor Andrew Cuomo needed to get his brownie points, needed to make sure that he was the first in the nation, and wanted to announce the toughest gun laws in the country so that he and his national ambitions would be furthered. The SAFE Act, as we all know, has nothing to do with public safety or preventing tragedy. It has to do with taking your rights away. But even more important to Andrew Cuomo, it has to do with him getting headlines in the New York Times and the other liberal press that loves gun control and doesn't give a rat's tail about the rights of people in Genesee County or any place in upstate New York. This bill is not about crime control. It is about controlling your liberties. America was born out of a struggle for freedom. And as we all know, in school we tend to memorize famous battles and George Washington and other historical events, which is terrific. But the real history of America is the history of the struggle for freedom of the individual against the power of government. Every issue before us today in the New York State Legislature can be boiled down to the rights of the individual versus the power of government. Property rights, the rights of the unborn, environmental issues, and certainly this Second Amendment issue, the SAFE Act that we're here tonight to discuss, all come down to the power of the state versus the power of the individual. You know, if you look at the constitutions of the world's nations, they essentially boil down into two categories. Pretty much every country guarantees freedom of religion and freedom of assembly. The difference is that the majority of the countries on this earth say that government gives you the rights to freedom of association and freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Whereas the American Constitution was the first ever drafted, taking principles from England and France and other countries, but the first, and now the longest lasting Constitution, that says government doesn't give you rights. Government protects your rights. It guarantees those rights that you have because you are a citizen and you have rights by want of God's gift to you as a human being.
Amen.
That is the difference between the American Constitution and the constitutions of these other countries. That is why America fought for our freedoms back in the 1700s. We have kept fighting for them ever since. We have fought against tyranny. We have fought against oppression. Under Ronald Reagan, we were the beacon of hope to the rest of the world. We liberated hundreds of millions across the world because of our belief in the freedom of individuals. And now Andrew Cuomo and the American left would take those rights that we have fought for and our predecessors have fought for generations and would say, well, the Constitution is a living document. It means what we want it to mean and what we interpret it to mean. We in this room know that's not true. The American Constitution contains values and prescribes a way of thinking about government that is immutable, unchangeable, and which needs to be defended against all comers. We will defend the American Constitution. We will stand up against the Andrew Cuomos and those who would take our rights away from us. And with the help of people like Dave DiPietro and all of you in this room and our fellow elected officials who believe in the power of the Constitution and that America is still the beacon of hope for the rest of the world, we will prevail. History is on our side because the history of humankind for 2,000 years is the gradual enhancement and expansion of individual liberties and human rights. The American Constitution and America still are the beacon of hope to the rest of the world. People say, why is it that they always call upon us? It's because we're the greatest nation on earth. Right. Our young men and women in the armed forces are doing what no other military on the planet can do. And God bless them for their contributions.
Amen.
God bless the United States of America.